Dr. Ferdinand Santos. Thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. I was just saying to you a moment ago, the timing of this recording is impeccable because of that NASA launch that's occurring, I believe, tomorrow night, US time.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's interesting how they're proceeding with the, let's call it the narrative, and trying to convince maybe themselves more than us that space can be conquered. So just a quick rundown of my background. So I did view your video with Bart Surreal a couple of weeks ago. Very interesting. I've been looking at scientism, which I've been writing about under various pseudonyms for quite a long time. By scientism, I mean the corruption and the perversion even of real science. And this goes back to the 17th century. So my background is science and physics and IT, and currently I'm working in AI, and I'm building AI models. So AI is a very interesting domain, and it can be a dangerous one. So that's my background. That's kind of my framework of thinking. And I've been educated in different countries, and it's not that the education's important. In fact, I think the education for many of us is a problem because you're indoctrinated. Your critical thinking skills are chopped out of you at a very young age. So it's not that the education's important. It's more, as I was telling James Dellingpole a couple weeks ago, we did a podcast, even though he and I have very different views on the shape of the planet and the universe, that it's a framework of thinking. So you can apply critical thinking to the narrative. And for me, I'll take IT, for example. I build software. So it's 0 and 1. It's yes or no. It works. It doesn't work. I tested it. It failed. That's my worldview. So if someone says to me, and I wrote a post in my Substack about Yuri Gagarin and what I call the Gagarin gag or fraud in 1961, there's absolutely no evidence he went anywhere. You just analyze what they give you. And so my argumentation around scientism has always been, I'm not going to argue outside your framework because I'm trained inside your framework. I know what you're saying to me. I understand the maths. I'm going to argue inside the framework and use your own data against you, or I'll use it with you if it's true. So if you go back in history and go back to, on my Substack, I take Einstein to the woodshed and there's nothing left of him. The entrails are burnt because I understand what they're trying to say and do, but I also understand that it's philosophically driven. It's not evidence-driven. And so I think a wake-up call for a lot of people in terms of scientism was the corona pandemic, which you've talked about and understand quite well. I don't believe in viruses because I see no evidence they exist. So when someone comes to me and heard about corona from a guy in Wall Street in November 2019, I had no idea what he's talking about. He said, go defensive cell, there's corona. But I know corona from the U.S. military intelligence operations of the 1960s. The U.S. had a military operation called Corona in the 1960s, a spy operation. So in my mind, I link it to this. Okay, I know it's a fraud. And I ask him, what is it? He says, it's something out of China, some flu. So I don't believe in viruses, so I don't buy into the narrative. But if you look at what they're trying to sell you during the Corona pandemic, there's no scientific evidence for their claims. In fact, their claims varied by the week, even by the hour. Their story changed all the time on what it was, how it was transmitted, how it was vectorized or transmitted across populations and countries. The story changed almost every day. The symptoms went from nothing, asymptomatic, you're not sick, but you are, to death by, in a car accident. And everything in between was covered by the PCR test, another fraud. So I think the Corona pandemic, which was a CIA operation, obviously. So my view of scientism is that there's always a power behind the throne of the science. And you can go through all the experiments in history and all the things we're told to believe. The speed of light, for instance. I posted my Substack last week that the speed of light experiment upon which relativity to the Big Bang is based is wrong. And you can rip it apart. You don't need a PhD. You don't need an ology degree. You need a calculator, common sense, understanding what they're doing and how they did it. And if you understand basic maths and understand basic physical sciences, you know that the equations are wrong. And you can prove they're wrong. And you can prove they're the right answer, which has nothing to do with their answer. So this is what I've been doing for a long time. And in the context of space, I've been looking at space since about the 1990s, and this is where I ran into Bart Surreal a long time ago. I read his books. I've seen his movies and videos, lots of other material. and he knows a lot about the topic, far more than I'll ever know about it. And he comes at it from a certain domain. So where I might come at it from the personality or viewpoint of an IT or physical science person, he comes at it from the photography and film angle. And it's interesting because that's where the NASA fanboys get very angry, as you know. If you mention the photographic fraud, Apollo 11, which is so obvious. I know nothing about photography. I'm just an average IQ guy. I can look at the photo and I know it's a fraud because I can see background and I can see the line of the foreground. So I don't know anything about photography, but I know there's a backdrop there. So this is known 40 years ago, before Bart started talking about it. There's been analysis done around the world in labs, universities, and at home by professionals, and photographic labs by professionals, looking at the Apollo photos. And 40 years ago, it was determined they were composites. If those analog photos are composites, it's a fraud. Full stop. You can come up with all the arguments against light and shadows and against all the other stuff that Bart talks about. And you can link to NASA and YouTube all day long. If it's proven that those photos are composites, those analog photos, then it's a fraud. It's as simple as that. Full stop. End of argument. And that was known about 40 years ago. But you don't hear about it. So, and Bart mentioned this in the interview 2 weeks ago. And you don't hear about this either. So 3 years ago, I'm in AI. I know the power of neural networks. I know what they can do. The Russians ran those photos, Apollo 11 photos, through the neural networks, 9 layers of them. And the conclusion was they're frauds or composites. End of story. I mean, the argument is over there. Now, I don't even look at the photos and frauds. So I look at it from a different viewpoint. So I look at space or locomotion, transport, whatever, from a physical and IT perspective. Is it feasible? Is it possible? If I pull up my calculator and do probability theory, it doesn't make any sense what they're telling me. That's the way I look at it. It's a little bit different than the way Bart looks at it. And Bart's viewpoint is entirely valid because he is a film domain expert. He understands shadows and lights and what you can do with films, and how you can make composites and edit things. I have no clue about that. But I believe what he says. But he's not the only one. There's thousands of people like him who have said the same thing, that it's a film. What Bart doesn't say, and what other people don't say, is what I write in my Substack, that there is the CIA in the 1960s developed, it has to be one of the greatest engineering simulation sites ever created, ever even devised or thought about, in Langley, Virginia. So my thesis is pretty simple. NASA was formed in 58 to take all the U.S. agencies, contractors in the space program, put them under one umbrella, right? That was NASA in 58, and coordinate the activities, okay? The CIA in Langley, Virginia, set up a world-class simulation center for NASA. So what does it tell you? CIA, NASA are like peas in a pod. I mean, they're the same. CIA is running NASA, always has. NASA is part of the U.S. military, always has been. What did the U.S. military say in the 1950s? We want to militarize space, we want to nuclearize it, and we want to control the weather. So people don't understand this. In the Eisenhower administration, they're talking about controlling the weather and using climate as a weapon. So that goes back to Tesla. Tesla created a DEW weapon, direct energy weapon. He demonstrated it in New York in, I think, 1933. He brought down a building with sound vibrations in New York. So that's what the U.S. has. The U.S. has that technology. They took it from Tesla, his designs. They have DEW weapons. DEW weapons could start an earthquake, for instance. Maybe weapons today, there's people online who claim that hurricanes or big storms from the ocean are somehow generated from these types of weapons. I don't know. I have no idea. But geoengineering is a fact. Climate control is a fact. We see it every day. And the second thing they said was we want to nuclearize space, because in the space race with the Soviets, he who controls space is going to control this planet, right? So that's what they said in the Eisenhower administration. So NASA comes along. It's associated with the CIA. The CIA sets up this massive facility in Langley, Virginia, in the 1960s. And what you don't hear a lot about is the use of this facility to simulate the entire Apollo missions end to end. End to end. So I have a Substack article. I go through the 5 main modules. And you could simulate all of the journeys. You could simulate all of the events. You could simulate the tracking. You could simulate events that will give concern or pause or maybe create a problem or an issue. There's training programs for everything. The entire journey from getting into the atmosphere and going to the moon and landing, coming back, could be simulated there. It's quite astounding. And they've now started to demise that facility and take it down. So the most obvious proof that the Americans never landed on the moon, for me, besides the photos, it would send the fanboys crazy. They go absolutely wild when you mention the photos, is simply this fact. I looked at the lunar module. I was very interested in this. So if you're interested in building things or how does the hardware work with the software, we'll get to the Gagarin gag in a second, but just I got on this tangent with the lunar module. But you take what they're trying to sell us. So there's a command module orbiting the moon 30 miles above the surface. There is a lunar module that detaches itself to ports and lands on the lunar surface. Okay, so to land, you need to have power. So there's no flame, there's no hole, there's no debris, and there's no noise. So then the fanboys go crazy. They start invoking magic words like vacuum. There's no vacuum anywhere. There's no vacuum in space. There's no vacuum on the moon. Why? Because they tell us, their own data says, that the moon is 1/6 gravity. What is gravity? Gravity is an energy pushing up through the medium. It's a physical force forcing its way up through the medium. That's why in this planet, in your chair, we say 1G. We're at 1G because gravity is strong. Atmosphere is dense. If I go to the ISS, which, if you believe the narrative, is 250 miles in space, the density of the atmosphere, even though it's within our atmosphere goes up for about 1,000 miles. Some people say it even encompasses the moon, 250,000 miles away. So up to 1,000 miles, we have an atmosphere. That's called the ether. It's called the medium. The ISS, the diffusion of molecules, etc., make it far less dense, probably a trillionth or something less dense than it is sitting in our chairs. But on the moon, they're telling us that there's 1/6 gravity. So gravity, energy, radiation, photons, light, whatever, needs something to travel through. That's quite obvious. No medium, no exchange. So it's clear. That's how life works. If you're looking at photons, starlight coming from space, it has to travel through something. It can't be a vacuum because that means nothing. You can argue that space is low energy, molecular diffusion, therefore different sets of properties. Electromagnetism will work differently there than on Earth. 100% agree with that. That's not what they tell us. They tell us it's a vacuum. It's not a vacuum. The moon, sorry, I have to do my hand wave here with the light sensor. So the moon has something that transfers gravity. And so this is something that they had never explained to us. So the moon faces the sun. It doesn't change. The face of the moon never changes. So what's generating what they say is 1/6 gravity? That needs to be assessed and determined. But whatever it is, if you have a structure that's heading down towards a surface, there's sound vibrations coming through the structure. That's basic physics. So if there's any medium whatsoever, or there's any structure whatsoever, you will hear and feel the sound. So I asked one of the fanboys once, the lunar module, the rocket they had, 10,000-pound thruster engine, that's what they say in their designs. That's the size of it. I asked a fanboy in a podcast, how many horsepower lawnmower engines do you think that is? And he didn't really understand the question. I said, take the rocket, okay, translate that into lawnmowers on your street, the you see people pushing around. 5 horsepower lawnmowers is the average. How many lawnmowers do you think it is? He had no idea. Okay, you don't need to have an ology degree or have a PhD to figure it out. It's about 18,000. So here's the story they're telling us. We have 2 guys, St. Buzz of the Bottles, I call him, Aldrin the Drunk, and St. Neil the Strong Arm, Apostle St. Neil. And they're going down in a module. It's a homeless shelter. It's a flimsy thing you can put your fist through. They're 2 feet above the flooring. So maybe there's flooring and subflooring, a cavity, whatever the construction is. They're 2 feet or 18 inches above 18,000 lawnmowers. Now, if you did that on Earth, as I said to the fanboy, in any structure on this planet, in this dense atmosphere, you go deaf immediately. You'll be screaming in agony. You'll not be talking on your phone to Houston, X miles away, in a very, oh yeah, we're at 500 feet, 100 feet. Oh yeah, we landed. Yeah. Okay, let's get the shoes on, guys. Let's go outside. That was a simulation. You're listening to it. It's a joke. You're on 18,000 lawnmowers. And on this planet, you probably would die, or you'd be in shock for the rest of your life. Your organs would be damaged. So on the moon, they say 1/6 gravity. But there's still a structure and there's still something there. So take 18,000 times by 0.16. You're still going to be deaf. You're still going to hear the noise in the background. And you still won't be able to communicate. And if you do communicate, your voice modulation is going to be rising and falling like a mountain range. And you're terrified to start with because you've never been here before. You have no idea what you're doing. So it's just not real. If you listen to the communications and you hear no noise in the background, they always invoke the magic word vacuum. That's not physics. Physics is a translation of sound vibrations, which are waves of energy through a structure. Can you imagine sitting on 18,000 lawnmowers? Can you imagine that? And that's their story. Their story is that we took 18,000 lawnmowers down to the surface and you hear nothing because of magic word insert here. It doesn't make sense. So then my second question, follow-up question to the fanboy was, show me on Earth that magical routine that you guys perfected up there. 30 miles above the moon's surface, you're orbiting around. That Collins is there. You detach the lunar module with the 18,000 lawnmowers. You land on the planet's surface, okay, in violation of any number of physical laws. Somehow you do it. Where did you do that in this planet? Show me where you trained for that on this planet. Show the simulation. Show the material. They have nothing. They can show you nothing. How did you perfect that?
Hang on. Didn't Neil Armstrong apparently test that and break his collarbone or something?
Yeah, he went all over the place. It's a homeless shelter. Imagine the rocket thrust. He wasn't even on the full rocket thrust. So he couldn't control it. It's like putting 18,000 lawnmowers on top of a little canopy structure and then doing one of these and trying to get it up. You're trying to raise it. You're trying to vertically lift it, vertically land it. You're trying to maneuver it. So this is what they're trying to do. So if you leave the command module is circling, you have to leave and you're going to enter the moon at a certain angle. So one of the problems with the narratives of the 1960s that's never discussed is the complicated piloting and maneuvering of something like a lunar module, but also something like a capsule that Gagarin supposedly sat in. They're doing all sorts of complicated, by their own designs, with their own information, based on what they tell us. They're doing all sorts of complicated maneuvers that were never tried on this planet. So how did it work first time on the moon? It's impossible to even imagine that. The probability theory, if you apply probability theory, very basic probability theory, to that is zero. It's less than 5%. It's insignificant, statistically speaking. It means it didn't happen. You have to prove first that you did it here on this planet. Now, you cannot replicate 18,000 lawnmowers on this planet because you'd kill the person inside. So that's what Armstrong was playing around with, something that was a fraction of the horsepower that they supposedly use on the moon. That's the only explanation. It's the only logical explanation. There's no possibility he sat on 18,000 lawnmowers. I've seen the videos, and it's a small craft. It's almost like a big drone is what it is. And there's no way that replicates what they're telling us they did on the moon. Again, no flames, no hole, no dust, a vertical landing. And then how did they get off the moon? There's no fuel.
And
so there's no flames.
that video is so ridiculous.
It's embarrassing. It's so bad. So this is why I go back to Langley. What did Langley have? Black curtains everywhere. I mean, Langley black curtains. I mean, that was their thing. Back in black, and they had the world's biggest gantry crane, which is a lifting crane. And so you're dealing with a multi-ton modules, 4 or 5 ton lunar module simulators. The gantry crane is more than big enough to pick it up and swing it. More than big enough and strong enough to drop it back down. That's why there's no flame. The easiest, most scientific, logical explanation why there's no flame for the LM is that the gantry crane against the black curtain just dropped it. And that's what you see. And that's what you see when it's lifted off. And you only see about 30 or 40 feet. Why is that? Because that's the crane working. And then it swings it out of sight. That's what they're doing. That's the most logical explanation. You don't need to go into physical theatrics or into what the fanboys talk about. It's this logical production theater that NASA and Hollywood are very good at making. Excellent at making. They're making this type of thing back in the 50s. Walt Disney was making films about space that I think provide a baseline for Kubrick and friends. Kubrick comes out with 2001 Space Odyssey. It looks real, doesn't it? If you've seen the movie. And you can replicate that with AI now. Deepfake AI can replicate 2001 Space Odyssey, and you don't know you're looking at AI. And I could rename it SpaceX. Here's Musk and friends on the SpaceX Odyssey 2026. You wouldn't have a clue what you're looking at. So this is what they're good at. It's image management. But the lie is in how they do it. If you pay attention, you don't need an ology degree or to have advanced education. You just need to have a critical thinking skill and understand that it doesn't add up. If you're landing something, there has to be a flame. And that's the dead giveaway there. So you know it's a fraud, or you have questions about it. And then if you're saying I did the landing on the moon, a normal person will say, that's fantastic. Can you show me your test data on this planet? I want to see everything. I'm very interested in this. How did you guys, you're so smart, how did you guys deport or decouple that lunar module homeless shelter from that capsule 30 miles in altitude? That's amazing, guys. How'd you do that? They can't tell you. There's no plans. Like Bart said, they destroyed everything. They destroyed even those designs. Well, they never had them, but if they did have them, they destroyed them. And that technology is something you would have kept, obviously, because that's one of their great problems. I did a probability analysis on my Substack looking at Musk and his Mars nonsense. But you have to be, I think you have to be cognitively disabled. I mean, I think you have to be really mentally disconnected from reality to tell someone you're going to Mars. I mean, this guy, Musk, is telling people he's going to colonize Mars by 2050 with 1 million Earthlings. That's what he said. And it's a public record. He said between 2030 and 2050, his Starship, which has never got off the launch pad, his Starship is a big shuttle. You remember the shuttle from the 80s and 90s. The shuttle was a huge creation. I can't remember the tonnage of it. It was massive. It was 300 feet or so in height. It was wide. And the Starship that Musk has imitates that, but it's a vertically taking off and vertically landing concept. Same as his Falcon 9 SpaceX rockets. They go up and they come back down. They go up 50 miles and then vertically land back down on special paths. So a question to Musk would be, if you're going to vertically land on Mars, where are the paths? How are you going to land there? So they'll come back with some word salads about doing Apollo 11. They're going to orbit. They're going to do this. Okay, so show me on Earth where you've done that. There's no proof of it. So this is just common sense. You want to see the evidence for their claims, because with AI now, they can produce absolutely anything. And we don't know what we're looking at. As I said, the James Delling poll is looking through a very dark window. You can't really see inside. We're not invited into the ISS. I have no idea if the ISS is 250 miles up. I see lots of fraud, lots of images, lots of videos. I know they're doing shots from the zero-gravity vomit comet plane, as they call it, going up and doing a parabolic arc to generate the weightlessness. We all know that. So I don't know what I'm looking at. Is it real? The zero-gravity plane is the same size as the ISS, exactly the same size. The ISS looks like a large Boeing jetliner in terms of its size and structure. So what am I looking at? Who knows? No idea. You see harnesses, you see wires, you see women astronauts with stupid hairdos and perms. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So is ISS real? I don't know. But the ISS is part of some logistical system they're going to build from the Earth to the moon. ISS was part of that. So getting back to logic and physical science. So as Bart mentioned, Musk said it takes 9 refuels, at least for SpaceX, Falcon 9 rocket and capsule to go to the moon. That's 9. Okay, so Apollo didn't have 9. Apollo 11 did not have 9. So on my Substack, I went through von Braun, the Nazi, who led the Apollo program. He said Empire State Building size and volume necessary to go to the moon. So the Saturn V rocket, if you want to be generous about it, if you look at the absolute volume in cubic measurements, the absolute volume is 1 to 10%. So they had maybe 10% of the fuel. They're burning 20 tons a second to get out of the atmosphere, and maybe 10%. So how do they get back? There's no fuel. So if Musk is right, it's 9. NASA says, no, Musk, it's not 9, it's 15. So NASA disagrees with Musk. They're arguing with each other over how many refuels to the moon. So take that and go to Mars. So how many logistical stations do you need to get from Earth to the moon? And you have to ask yourself, why would I bother? That's another argument. I think the moon is a complete waste of time. But then between the moon and Mars, how can you possibly do a moon to Mars mission without logistical supplies, fuel, food? It's 4 to 10 months journey. You're going to have sickness. You're going to have all sorts of other parameters and variables at work. You've never been to space. You don't know what you're getting into. So I always go back to, when I talk to the fanboys, I say, explain to me Ferdinand Magellan. And half of them don't PhDs in physics. Who's Ferdinand Magellan? Who's that guy? Oh, well, he's not taught in schools anymore because he'd be classified probably as a white extremist racist because he was Catholic and pious. He was a very difficult personality, but he was a doer. So he and his men, 250 of them, in 1519, get on 3 ships in Sevilla, Spain, and they do the Magellan. They do the circumnavigation of the globe. Magellan dies in the Philippines. This also, by the way, disproves the flat Earth concept. I don't know how you can sail around a flat Earth, but Magellan his crew circumnavigates the globe. 12 survive. 12 survive and make it back to Sevilla, including Pigafetti, who's the journal keeper, who kept the record of the trip. So absolutely fascinating. But what's really interesting about Magellan's trip, besides the fact they're guessing a lot, they didn't really know what they're doing, was that they stopped everywhere. They stopped at the Azores, in the Canaries, in West Africa. They take the winds and the currents over to Brazil and go down the coast. They stop, refuel. They need wood, they need water, et cetera, et cetera. Patagonia, Pigafetti writes that they met Patagones, which is Bigfoot giants, et cetera. Around they go. And so, but they're resupplying themselves all the time. And how can you go to Mars from planet Earth without an appreciation of basic logistics, basic maths? You don't have the supply depots to get there. And NASA and Musk are arguing about how many do you need between here and the moon. So then applying logic back to Apollo 11, how did they do it? How do they do it without fuel? How do they do it without a landing module with no flame? How do they do all this? So forget the photos. I don't even look at the photos. And then with the Gagarin fraud, we can talk about that if you like, because that really kickstarts the whole thing, in my view. So my view of scientism, going back to the 17th century and all the fraud that I've uncovered, all the experiments I've demolished, and not just me. I mean, thousands and probably millions of people have done the same thing. We don't hear us, you don't hear our voices because we don't have the support to go publicly and to claim what we think we might know, or at least get the conversation started. So if you look at a fraud like Einstein, the only reason you know about Einstein is the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds promoted that guy. He was demolished by 1920. His theories were utter rubbish by 1920. Every single public debate, there's only a few of them he ever went into, he got absolutely eviscerated. But the Rothschilds got in the game. Why is that? Einstein's Jewish. We want to set up a Hebrew university in Jerusalem. We need an icon. We're going to create an icon. We're going to create Dr. Einstein to be the face of our science. And they gave Einstein a share in Hebrew University. He's now patented, copyrighted. They make $15 million US a year in royalties just in his name. So this is why he's in your face. So none of us have that platform. We're not the Rothschilds, and the narrative is never going to publish anything that's against the narrative. But in the history of scientism, the reason why I got interested in the moon fraud is what it means. So you asked Bart Sabriel in the interview, you said, Bart, who cares? I mean, what does it mean, Bart? So for me, it's very simple. It's U.S. hegemony or hegemony, depending on how you want to pronounce the word. It's the New World Order. It's the context of the Cold War. Space was viewed as part of that war, right or wrong. And who controlled space is going to control the planet. That's what the U.S. military said in the 1950s. That's also what the Soviets said. We need to control space to control and win this war, the so-called Cold War. So it becomes it becomes a game of absolutes. So there can be no co-joined winners. So Kennedy comes in office and he starts talking about cooperation with the Soviets in space. He doesn't see a need for competition. So he's, of course, assassinated by the CIA, and because he fired Dulles and Dulles ran the CIA, etc. There's a great book by a guy called The Devil's Chessboard, by a guy called Talbot, which lays out the absolute demonic evil nature of the CIA. And the CIA is a nexus of the deep state, of course. So people like Kennedy said, well, we just cooperate. The military didn't want to cooperate. So the Gagarin fraud in 1961 comes after about a decade of miserable failures on both sides. So I write this on my Substack. I go through the Gagarin antecedents, what goes on with the Soviet space program. So as James Delingpole said correctly, there's a tendency now, when we view the West, we know the West is corrupt. We know our governments are in some way demonic and evil. The institutions are perverse, and they're trying to undermine our culture and our heritage and our traditions. So this is all true. But as he said, and he's quite right, you don't then panegyrize the Soviets and say, well, they're the good guys now. The Soviets are not good guys. So I go through the murders. So the Soviets were launching cosmonauts, dogs, and cats and monkeys into space. I think who knows what they're doing? They don't provide any information. But the Soviets were not very good at sharing information. They were not transparent. This was a totalitarian, very evil regime. There's absolutely no way you can defend it. They were launching cosmonauts, probably without even their own knowledge, including females, caught by ham operators in Europe in the early 1960s and late 1950s, launched them probably into 400 miles or so, which tells you the extent of their rocket program, how advanced it was. So after World War II, the Soviets and Americans kind of divided up the Nazi scientists, so to speak, and including rocketry engineers, including people like von Braun. But the Soviets apparently got their dirty hands on actual functioning models. I don't think the Americans did. The Americans had the people and designs, but not the actual functioning hardware. The Soviets got some functioning hardware, gave them a head start. You can see this in the late 50s and early 60s. They're launching people, testing the atmosphere, and they're dying. They're launching cats and dogs, but they don't tell you this. The Soviets tell you the opposite in their propaganda. Oh, we did this, we did that. Oh, we sent a probe to the moon and brought back some rock. Oh, we sent up the dog and it came back and everything was happy. All frauds, of course, and very evil. So before 1961, there's nothing but failure on both sides. NASA in 1958 is formed. NASA and the Americans can't even get a payload off the deck. They can't get an unmanned probe into the right orbit. The rocketry is far behind that of the Soviets. They're light years, literally, if you want to look at it in terms of the Big Bang Theory. They're light years behind the Soviets. So there's no possibility that they close the gap between 61 and 69. If you just look at rocketry and technology, there's no possibility unless something magical happened. But in 1961, I think what happened was that the Cold War becomes very political. The Americans get involved with Vietnam. Kennedy is getting involved with NASA. The CIA is involved. And Kennedy's told in early 1961 that the Americans can be the first in space. Now, space is completely ill-defined. So the official declaration of space is above 62 miles, something called a Kármán line. Above that, the atmosphere changes and becomes less dense. And you can get you go past that level and you can head towards orbit, which is 200 miles. So the standard narrative says 62 miles and above is declared to be space. I don't know why it is, because the atmosphere is 1,000 miles in altitude, supposedly. So why 62 miles? So it's very arbitrary. And even the 200-mile demarcation into orbit is also pretty arbitrary. And you look at the evidence of what Gagarin said he did, which he didn't do, but also the ISS. So anyway, so the Soviets probably heard that the Americans were going to do a Capricorn 1, which is a great movie that everyone should watch. Capricorn 1 goes through how a journey to Mars could be faked. So it might be appropriate, since Musk said that last year that in 2026 he's going to Mars with a Starship which has never gotten off the pad, that's blown up 5 times and has never had any success whatsoever. So he said this year he'd go to Mars. So let's see what happens with Musk. But they could easily fake it with deep fake AI as well. So what the Soviets find out in early 61 is, I think the Americans are going to do a Capricorn 1. And so the Americans had 3 Top Gun studs, and these guys were Navy pilots, and they were intelligent, physically fit, and extraordinarily experienced. So they had Shepard, they had Grissom, and they had John Glenn. Grissom was the most senior. These guys all had 5, 6, 7, 8,000 hours of jet pilot experience. I mean, they knew what they were doing. And why is that important? You cannot possibly satisfy a mission in a capsule unless you understand G-forces, how to act under G-forces, how to act under extraordinary speed and stress. And that's what these 3 guys demonstrated. They could fly jets at Mach speed, Mach 5, etc. At high speeds, they could maneuver it, they could take it, they could manipulate it, articulate the plane, etc. And they understood G-force. They understood going from 1 G in our chair to 5, 6, 7 G, which is 5, 6, 7 times your body weight, which is like having something coming down on you like a ton of bricks. It must be frightening, it must be terrifying. You need thousands of hours of training for that. So you can do the simulator training, which they did, but you need real experience. So these guys were serious. Now, I don't think the 3 of them went up and did their flights. I don't believe that. There's no evidence for that. But at least you could imagine that these are the right types of pilots, right? Now, let's go to the Soviets. So they have this guy, Gagarin. Okay, they call him the peasant who fought the fascists. Nobody can tell you what he did against the Nazis. No clue. So he arrives almost out of nowhere in late 1960 or so. He arrives on the scene. Nobody knows who the heck he is. So and suddenly in April 1961, he's the center of attention. So I went through and I researched. I tried to find out, even using Soviet information sources, could find out almost nothing about this guy. Okay, he was somewhat handsome. I call him a fat-faced peasant because that's what I think he reminds me of. But he was a useful prop, and he was put there for a reason because the Soviets knew that the Americans were going to do a Capricorn 1 sometime in the spring of 1961 and say they're the first men in space, whatever space means. And it's all nonsense anyways, but that's what that, but in the context of the Cold War, context of national prestige, technological excellence, our system is better than their system. We're going to win this, guys. Camaraderie, enthusiasm for the cause, people waving their flags. The space race was extremely important. So the Soviets, in their failing economy, their failing state, they're bankrupt in 1965, 66. So before that, 5 years before that, you can see the writing on the wall. So they need to do something to generate enthusiasm and a commitment to the Soviet cause. So Gagarin shows up out of nowhere. So I went through and I found I can maybe claim that he had 250 hours of pilot experience, 250 hours in total. So that'd be like you and me, Jeremy, going to the local airfield somewhere in south of England or South Africa and saying, okay, I want to sign up to be a pilot. Let's start the training, boys. You don't go from 0 to 2, in 250 hours flying a jet plane, do you? No chance. So I don't know how many hours he had in a jet plane. You can't find out. I'm guessing a couple of dozen. Maybe he was so smart and so clever that he had 100 hours. He advanced very quickly. There's no evidence he was smart. In fact, he was quite stupid, as we'll talk about in a second. But I don't know where this guy comes. He's in the Soviet Red Air Force, and he's chosen for Vostok 1, the April 12th flight, which comes almost out of nowhere as well. So before Gagarin, there's failures in the Soviet program. There's mislaunches. There's capsules blowing up. Same problems the Americans are having. There's no unmanned flights to speak of that are credible, say up to 200 miles. So a normal person would say, okay, you're putting a guy up there. Can you show me the telemetric and physical proofs that you did an unmanned flight? You did it's called a drone flight, a remote controlled capsule flight, unmanned, to 200 miles. Can you show it to me? Of course, there isn't any. Can you show me the telemetry and the simulations you guys did for X number of years or months to get him ready in April 1961 to do this feat? Can you show it to me, please? Of course, there's nothing. Can you show me how the analog systems work, please? The communications. And what people here don't understand in today's world is that there's massive difference between analog, it's not even computing, it's analog hardwired circuits versus what we take for granted to be computer operating systems and real-time software and real-time data analysis. It's like comparing the Lada to a Maserati. I mean, there's no comparison. So you want to know about the analog. So analog communications, how would that work in reality? So there's all sorts of questions you have. So you want to know, how did you prepare this guy? Show me all the proof that he was ready to go in April 1961. Of course, he wasn't. So that their Top Gun equivalent of Shepard is a guy called Ilyushin. And he had thousands of hours of experience. He was a jet fighter pilot, and he was credible. He's smart. He was well-versed in the technology. He understood the technology. He understood his plane. Pilots probably have a relationship to the plane, much like a tradesman has a relationship with his tools, right? You get to know, you feel the plane, you feel the tools. That's why you're good with the tools. So they had some symbiotic relationship usually. Gagarin didn't have any of that. There's no evidence whatsoever Gagarin even knew how the capsule worked. So Ilyushin's a serious guy. So he goes up on April 7th, 5 days before, crashes in China. So where are they taking off from? Well, Kazakhstan. Well, let's pull out a map and have a look. Oh, Kazakhstan here, China here. So he did one of these. He did the parabola, up and down. Something went wrong. He crash landed. And who knows how high he went up? Nobody knows. But only through his skills as a pilot was he able to survive. An amateur like Gagarin would have died. Would likely have died. The probability of his dying would have been great. So this is the best they have. He can't even get better. He can't even really go more than 200 or 300 miles. You look at it, a distance, threshold distance. So there's something wrong. He's in the same capsule, Ilyushin, same technology. 5 days later, Gagarin goes up, leaves Kazakhstan, goes over Soviet Russia, Kamchatka. He goes past Alaska, down the Pacific, does the left-hand turn at the bottom of South America, up through the Atlantic, Africa, over the Middle East, back to Saratov, where he was trained as a parachutist. So he went back to where he trained. So that's their story. That's their flight path. So it's impossible. So mathematically, it's impossible. So you can just do probability theory, right? You can look at three things. You could look at 200 because of the complexity of what they're doing, the complexity of maneuvering these craft going up at the G-force. They have to angle the craft. They're constantly doing something on the angling. And they have to then spin at a certain height above 60 miles. They spin the craft around. So it's fat bottom first with the heat shield going through the atmosphere out into orbit. Then he spins it around again, fat bottom down in. The fat bottom, when he comes down over the Soviet Union, the fat bottom has to be the heat shield coming down. These are very, very difficult maneuvers for an amateur. So on my Substack, I go through all the maneuvers they have to make. There's no possibility in amateurs making these. You have to worry about so much. You have retro rockets, parachutes, you have telemetry, communications, you have warning signals, you have stuff flashing in the capsule. You have to react. You're going at a G-force that would crush the average person. You're going at a phenomenal speed never before simulated. He's going at 17,500 miles an hour when he hits the 200-mile altitude. There's no simulation before 61 of any human withstanding that speed at all anywhere. But yet the first time it's tried, it's okay. Yeah, we did it. Fat bottom first out through into orbit. No problems, guys. 17,000 miles an hour. An amateur. So if you look at probability theory, you look at who the guy was. You look at the failures. So it's called Bayesian theory. So I take the events before the event I'm actually assessing for probability. So I say, okay, stuff happened that's related to my probability theory assessment before. So that's called Bayesian theory. I'm going to add those events. So the Soviets before Gagarin had a 90% failure rate. 90% failure. So I look at the guy, I look at the failure rate, and then the canary in the coal mine, the canary in the coal mine is the landing. Do you think it's possible that you're going to land right next to where you parachuted trained? Is that even? So that's the canary, right? You can start with that. So three factors to put into your probability analysis. What's the probability of his experience being enough? What's the probability impact of the 90% failure rate? What's the probability that he would land near his landing zone in Saratov? At circumnavigating the Earth, 24,900 miles at 17,500 miles an hour, 200 miles in altitude, with the most complicated possible maneuvering, which I list in my Substack. I try to describe it in simple terms, but if you just go through the landing, it's amazing that they could land at anything. So the probability theory, when you go through it, is 1 in 10 million. So you can play the numbers all day long. This is three factors. Probability theory. So you don't need a PhD. You don't need to know about physics or rocketry or any of that stuff. You pull out your calculator. You can go through the entire flight. Now, I've not included the rockets, the fuel, the technology, the analog communications, all the other factors involved in hardware and software in that analysis. If you were to add up all the components and all the milestones on his supposed circumnavigation, everything has to be perfect. The only way you go to Mars from Earth or to the moon from Earth or do the Gagarin is if every single part of milestone component is 99.99% resilient. And that is not happening because I can go, go ahead.
But Ferdinand, we all know it was real because Nixon phone called them on the moon.
Oh, yeah, with the magic analog. So analog communication, that's a beautiful one. So magic green phone. And I don't know if it's Photoshopped or not, but I've seen Nixon talking on the phone like this very casually with no delays, no latency. And on the background, there's a picture of the moon. Now, I don't know if that's been Photoshopped in or if some conspiracy theorist has added that.
Well, apparently that photograph came from prior missions.
Okay, so maybe it's after, but the Apollo 11 landing, there's communications there, right? So maybe who knows what that picture's about? But the analog communications is impossible because the analog signal will never carry that far. So if you look at Gagarin, take his flight. So the NASA fanboys and the Gagarin fanboys will say he was tracked, he was tracked, he was tracked. You're not tracking anything. Let's go back to what radar is. So people know what radar is. So in this country, in 1961, in the UK, as an example, in the UK, there's 50 or 60 radar stations. Why so many? Well, they're limited terrestrially to 90, maybe of 1960. World War II was 90 miles terrestrial limit. By 1961, depending on the upgrades and so on, you might get out to 150. So what does it mean? I have a spoke, but no hub. I'm a radar station on the east coast of England. I'm looking towards Holland. Okay, all I'm doing is sending out a radio beam at a frequency in the sky. I'm just sending it out, and it hits something, comes back. It's very weak, and this is the red dot. So it hits my antenna. I do some translation, and the processing logic, it pops up on my screen. It's a red dot. I have no idea what it is. It could be a Soviet bomber. It could be a miniature badger flying a soup can. We don't know what it is. So there's no real-time communications here. And so I keep sending up the beam, and then I track it. So I have to phone somebody. I tell Central Command, I got something on my radar. I have no idea what it is. We need to send up some planes, guys, and find out. That's the reality of 1961. There's a limit terrestrially to radar. There's a limit 12 to 15 miles in altitude. The Soviet bombers flew at 15 miles or so in altitude trying to avoid the radar. So look at an analog signal. It's casting a radio beam from 200 miles in the atmosphere. You have to go through the atmosphere, the medium. There's going to be distortions, refractions. By the time it gets down 200 miles to the Earth, there's nothing left. You would not be able to recognize that signal from radio static in the background. That's just a simple analog fact. So you're not doing anything with analog. And if you look at Garen's flight path, Kazakhstan, doing the Pacific, the left turn, and all that stuff over the Atlantic, which would never happen. It would take skills that this guy did not possess. There's no radar stations there. There's no way to track it. There's no way to track where he went. So when the fanboys say tracking, what are they talking about? They're talking about the 10 minutes of communication in the middle of the flight that's pre-recorded and broadcast from a terrestrial tower near Moscow. And that's picked up by whoever, the U.S. military, perhaps NATO, perhaps whatever. Somebody picks it up, and they don't know what it is. They're just assuming it's valid. That's coming from a capsule 200 miles up with an analog signal, which will never reach down to Earth, and they accept it at face value. Now, they could do that for many reasons, but there's no proof there's no proof whatsoever that signal can be independently verified. It never was, and there's just no logical proof that he was tracked anywhere because there's no global tracking system. There's no Eye of Sauron in 1961 fixated on Gagarin and his capsule and doing one of the, wherever he went, the Eye of Sauron was following. It doesn't exist. There's no way that a central location near Moscow can possibly receive analog beams or communications from something 200 miles in the atmosphere in 1961. The analog circuits we're not powerful enough. The analog signal is not powerful enough. The chance of that happening, I did a probability analysis, is I think it was 10,000 or something of 1%. I mean, it's irrelevant. And that's also true of the communications. There's no such thing as analog communications to the moon or analog communications from a terrestrial site to something like a Gagarin capsule. It doesn't work with analog. You need digital. So now, yes, I would believe if they're doing it now, but yeah, digital, of course. We have real-time operating systems. We have real-time software. We do have rudimentary global tracking systems. I mean, there's gaps in them, but we do have them. We do have ballistic and optical radar, which can go out 20,000 miles into space. So yeah, I can buy it, guys, but not 1961. 15 miles was the limit, and they're using analog. Who believes this?
But it was 1969. Hold on. But it was 1969, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's 69. It's the same thing. So there's some improvements in radar and analog communication. But in 61, what I'm saying is NASA claims that in 61 they tracked Gagarin, but they didn't because it's a 10-minute broadcast from a terrestrial tower in Moscow. 1969, there's no possibility that a green analog phone in Washington can possibly process sound communications or signals to the moon. It's impossible. There's absolutely no way of doing it. You have to have an analog to wireless translation and communication, which didn't exist. So then NASA and the fanboys come back with the S-transponder, the magic device that made it all possible. Okay, well, show it to me. I'd like to use it. Oh, no. It's at the Smithsonian. Okay, you can go there and have a look at it. It's on display. So you want to use it yourself to prove it. I would love to do that. Who wouldn't? But they won't let you have it because it didn't exist. It was in their minds, imagination. You cannot have analog communications with a wireless transmitter on the moon. There's no proof that it happened. You'd have to, again, simulate that on this planet. Where's the proof that anyone could call a remote landing, say in the desert somewhere, from a wireless transmitter or from an analog phone to a wireless transmitter and prove that it works. That's what they would have done. You would have asked for the test cases. Give me the test cases, guys. Show it to me on this planet. How'd you do it? Fascinating. The S device. That's fascinating stuff. Well done. Then you could at least prove it and convince yourself it happened. But there's no proof of it. And as Bart said, there's no latency. It's almost as if they're talking, from room to room. And again, it's a simulation because you can tell by the voices. You can tell by the way they act that they're just acting. It's a simulation. So there's no reality to it. And I think the body, you talked with Bart about this, the body language after the 69 Apollo 11 flight, Armstrong is totally confused. He's looking at a teleprompter and I don't know if he's not maybe the brightest guy in the world, but he can't get his answer straight. So he's asked a very simple question. Did you see stars? So if I went to the moon, I'd be talking for an hour about it. I saw exactly this and this and this. And we did that telemetry and that radiation reading. And over here, I saw even be able to shut me up. This guy says no. He says, I don't recall. I know on the moon, I was taking pictures of the solar corona. Now, NASA's own data says that if you took the emulsion film, analog, again, back to analog, and the problem with analog in terms of communications, it's based on a vacuum, a sealed vacuum. You can't track real-time signals with a vacuum. It doesn't work. That's why you need digital. So with an analog camera, emulsion-based film, carbon-based film, NASA says if you point that at the sun and take a picture, it destroys the camera. That's what they said. So here we have Armstrong, St. Neil the Strong Arm, saying that he pointed at the sun and was taking pictures. Well, there's no pictures of the solar corona. None are available. So yeah, that's what he said he was doing.
But also, apparently they use some sort of Hasselblad camera or whatever. But how the hell did they actually hold the camera and take photos with those gloves?
Well, it's a chest. It's not on the chest. So this is the other fraud. This is why and what drives the fanboys crazy. So there's that idiot photo of Aldrin doing this. So there's the lunar module, U.S. flag, and Aldrin doing one of these, saluting it. Very famous photo, the iconic Apollo 11 photo, taken by Armstrong. The camera's on his chest. Okay, if you look at the photo, the camera is not situated on his chest, and it's perfectly framed. It's as if it was taken in a studio. Now, you can imagine you're on the moon. You got the fat gloves, you got the motion camera, you're terrified, right? You've been traveling 24,000 miles an hour for at least 10, 12 hours. Okay, you've done the impossible. You somehow got yourself, the lunar module, deported and decamped from the main capsule. You've done the impossible. You've landed somehow with this homeless shelter, and you're taking a picture. I would have believed it more if the picture was awry and unsteady, like you and I take. Like I'd be like, it's not going to be a perfectly well-framed picture with everything nicely symmetrical and arranged. It's impossible. And if you look at the reverse photo they have of that same shot, going back to lights and shadows and the waving flag, it's different. So they've taken two shots of Aldrin doing this with the waving flag from two different angles. They're mirror opposites of each other. But if you look at the shadows and lighting and the arrangement, they're not mirror opposites. They're different. So they've taken them at different times. And it doesn't make any sense when you look at what they say they did. They took a couple of snaps, and these snaps were done within a certain period of time. That's not what you see. You see framed photos that are very carefully stage managed. And they made a mistake doing that. Now, the waving flag is obviously from the simulator, which is what it was, with a fan. The simulators would have had fans to cool off the engines. Or it's from a fan in the studio, in this case, Cannon Air Force Base. So what Bart mentioned to you is correct. There is lots of evidence that in June of 1968, they shot the Cannon Air Force Base over a period of a week or two. They had Lyndon B. Johnson and other dignitaries there visiting, looking at the film production. And there's lots of evidence he did that. But what people don't say, what they don't marry that to, is the Langley, Virginia simulation data. So Bart told you that the control room would just get data and know what it was. It's very easy to do in IT. We do it all the time. We do it every day, every week. We hook two networks together. I control the data source. I control the data. I send it over the network connection I made. I control. You're the front end. You're the control room. I'll send you the data. You don't know what I'm sending you. You don't have a clue. And you can see that in the simulations that NASA and European Space Agency have made for the ISS, but also for training in space. These simulations are incredible. I mean, you don't know what you're looking at. You could be a part of the simulation and actually think you're going to the ISS, for instance, or you're going to the moon. They're that good. So if I feed you data, whether it's a tracking signal or whether it's some telemetric information on flight progress, everything from heart rates to what the speed, whatever it is we're doing, the telemetry, you don't know what you're looking at. And then you marry that to the film, it's not that difficult to see how they did it. And it wouldn't take that much time and money, to be honest with you. They had 250 billion in budget, 250 billion. So you assume that because it's the CIA and NASA, half of it's money laundered. So they have 100 billion or so left. You can do a lot with 100 billion. Since 1961, you've had 1.5 trillion pumped into the space programs in the United States. You add in the Russian, Chinese, Canadian, European, Japanese, Indian, whatever. You're probably looking at, and the Soviets as well, you're probably looking at a total investment since 1960, I don't know, 4 trillion US dollars. What can you do with 4 trillion? So the simulations they have are phenomenal. And the data points are being fed to you. So the tracking fanboys, they don't understand radar. They don't understand analog communications, which means the tracking was impossible in 69 and in 61. They don't understand that NASA admitted in 69 that they cloaked the signals because the Soviets might be up to something. The Soviets have never claimed to track Apollo. That's simply a lie. They've never done that. They've always denied tracking Apollo. They were paid billions of dollars. This is the other thing that people don't understand. The Cold War race was actually, in some ways, cooperation. The Soviets were given billions by the Americans in the 1960s to stay solvent, because by 1965 they were bankrupt, and so they got ransom money from France and West Germany, paid by the U.S. The U.S. gave them some money probably to be quiet about the Apollo program, and the Soviets were able to stagger on and survive for a little bit longer. It's good for business because NASA now is fully funded, and NASA, 1.5 trillion since the 1960s. It's a lot of money, and you can imagine all the vested interests. The military complex, the contractors, the senators, the politicians, the fake news media, the fake science journals, they're all a part of it. They're all getting paid
SpaceX.
off.
Elon.
Oh, SpaceX. So I've not spent that much time looking at SpaceX. I did do some posts on my Substack. SpaceX is a real company. There's a lot of problems with what they're showing us and telling us. Again, you're into video and image fraud. A lot of the imagery in space from space.
He sent a car. Do you remember that?
Sorry?
He sent a car to space. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. So the Tesla, that's a classic. So fanboys also get wound up about that, don't they? So they sent this convertible, and there's, I don't know, it's just bizarre. But apparently they have cameras attached to the chassis and the frame from different angles, and they prove that they're in space, and the Earth's in the background. There's one shot I put in my Substack where it must be the world's longest selfie. I mean, it's a camera out, I don't know, 50 feet or something, looking back on the car with the Earth in the background. There's all sorts of problems with it. The Earth in the background looks different than other shots you see from SpaceX or from the ISS. And this is the problem. And again, the fanboys go crazy, right? But the images don't add up. If you go back to John Glenn in '62, his iconic shot of the Earth from supposedly 187 miles in altitude. I don't think Glenn went there. I think it was a Capricorn 1. It looks totally different than what you see today. The SpaceX stuff, sometimes when they land, or when they dock, rather, at the ISS, they open up the portholes, and light streams in. Well, I'm told that space is dark. Then the fanboys have a whole bunch of stuff where they say, well, that we can explain it this way. But if space is molecularly diffuse, and you're telling me that the starlight is blocked, the starlight's blocked out by the solar radiation, which is permeating everything, and therefore at some distance it gives blackness. I should see the blackness anyways, regardless of whether I have a camera or not. But you don't. You see a lot of light at times, but other times you see darkness. So the spacewalks, it's all dark. But if I was to pull open the porthole of a SpaceX and do a spacewalk, what would I see? Would I see light, or would I see darkness? So when he talked about this, they get very upset, very angry. So there's discontinuities in the narrative. I don't know what they're up to, but the images, there's a video of a SpaceX launch where there's a mouse running around in the fuselage. In that same, or different launches, you see they have 2 cameras mounted on the fuselage taking pictures of the Earth, but the Earth looks different, very strange. And at some point in time, they become switched. So the images kind of reverse. You don't know what's going on. Did something happen with the rocket? Did the rocket kind of just flip around? Or it's very strange. So they're doing something, SpaceX, but there's no chance of going to Mars. As Musk said, there's no chance of even going to the moon. So I don't know about the Artemis program. Go ahead.
So we kind of coming in for a landing, if you'll excuse the pun. But what do you think happened on the day in 1969? I mean, there was a rocket that went up.
I think so. Bart on his website, he's mentioned this as well. He's got the Earth on window trick. So, and they do it today. So you see it with Blue Origin's flights, which are the last Blue Origin flight in April was fraudulent as well last year. So yes, the rocket goes up, but there's I don't know how long the countdown was exactly. It was over 3 hours. So I know what Alan Shepard in '61 had 3 hours and 50 minutes between supposedly going into the capsule and on the rocket and then taking off. I don't know why it's such a long countdown. I have no idea. But okay, there's the fanboys will be able to discuss in detail. But there's a 3 hour or so window. So yeah, the rocket goes up, the capsule's there. You might have seen them go in, but as Capricorn 1, the movie says, they also might have gone back out. And so how difficult would it be to fake that? So if you look at where Shepard lands, he lands in the Bahamas, 300 miles away. He could be there in 45 minutes. A military seaplane. So what happened to the boys in the Apollo? Well, they have all sorts of time because they're not coming back for a couple of days, right? The Apollo 11. So lots of time to get them over to the Pacific, over to Hawaii, and you could drop them from another military seaplane.
But hold on. So more specifically, could that rocket then simply have just gone into orbit and that's that? Or do you think it might have actually...
Well, it crash landed in the ocean. So the Apollo 13, they found the Soviets found debris in the Bay of Biscay. So you can definitely find the rocket. You can crash it somewhere. You can send it up into space, whatever. And then the key is Langley. So the key is Langley married to the film of the Canadian Air Force. The Langley simulates everything. I mean everything. So you could do everything in Langley. So you don't. They just pre-record everything.
Sure.
So before.
So what about the Artemis that's about to launch?
I haven't really looked at the Artemis. The technology is different. The technology is far different than the 1960s. I've not even looked at it.
The claim is that they're going to go to the moon, go around the moon, and come back.
That's a claim. Who knows? Again, with deepfake AI, I have no idea. So the question I would ask is, show me where you've tested beyond 400 miles in altitude. Show me where. So Polaris in 2024 supposedly went 870 miles. It's a fraud. SpaceX, it's a complete fraud. It's a joke, that one. So they can't prove they've gone above 400. So you want the telemetry. So if you're going to the moon 250,000 miles, you're doing the Magellan, where did you go incrementally? That's what they have to prove. They have to prove they went incrementally, did all the testing, all the radiation through the Van Allen radiation belts, which nobody even knows really because we've never been through there. 30,000 miles in width, 60,000 miles in width. Radiation levels are 10,000 times what they are on this planet. Nobody knows. We've never been there. So they're trying to do telemetry on that. So you want to have all this information before you can claim you did a flyby on the moon. I want to know all the steps that prepared you for that journey. And before you went into production, before you went live, show me your testing. Show me your test environments. That's what they have to prove. And they never do it. If you ask for this information, they don't have any. They say it's top secret. So Trump very conveniently classified NASA as a spy agency last year. So if you're to ask NASA for this information, they'll say, well, we're a spy agency. It's national security, Trump. I can't share it with you. Isn't that convenient? See, we don't know.
So basically, you have to just trust what they tell you. That's that.
And this goes back to philosophy and scientism. People who believe in the moon landings trust government. People who put a diaper on their face and stab their arms, shoulders with poisons from a criminal industry trusted the science, trust government. They're just indoctrinated. So people who look at the Artemis program and whatever imagery they produce, it'll take a long time to digest it, right? It's going to take a long time to look at it and analyze it. Will take years. So they'll immediately trust it. It'll be on the fake news. It'll be broadcast everywhere. Back to the moon will be the headlines and all that stuff. We'll soon be walking. And so Musk in 2017 promised that by 2018 there'd be a moon bus. That the U.S. class wearing their Walmart jeans would be wandering around the moon doing some tourism. He said that would happen in 2018. You're going to hear the same thing again. Moon tourism, you'd be playing golf and driving Jeeps around like they did during the Apollo program, or maybe the Trump Tower in Tranquility Bay, having a weekend out with your better half. This is what they're going to promote now. But we don't know what we're looking at, Jerm. We have no clue.
Ferdinand, how can my audience follow your work?
So I'm on Substack. So I have, it's unstabinated. So UNSTABBINATED, unstabinated. Substack.com. It tells you that I didn't take the corona stabs, unstabinated. I'm still alive. I was promised a winter of death. Apparently it didn't happen. Still waiting for it, by the way. I was told not to go out and exercise. I ran almost every day. So, still healthy, still doing well. Unstabinated is really almost a philosophical point with me. And that tells me everything I need to know about a person. Really does. If you believe in the corona scamdemic, then you and I are probably not going to be friends because you have a different worldview than I do. And it's just not, the twain will never meet.
Dr. Ferdinand Santos, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. And it was fun. Thank you very much.